4 words. That's all it was. 4 words dropped into the federal rulebook in 2022. Manually operated driving controls. That's it. That's the whole thing. It wasn't a ban. It wasn't a mandate. It didn't force anybody to build anything or stop building anything. It was a definition. A little block of text explaining what the federal government means when it uses the words steering wheel, brake pedal, gas pedal. Nobody covered it. There was no press conference, no hearing, no angry op-ed. Why would there be? It's a definition. Definitions are boring. Definitions are what you skip to get to the part that matters. Here's what I've learned in a long career reading these documents. The definition is the part that matters. Because once a government defines a category, it can start writing exceptions for that category. And an exception is a switch. And a switch, once it's installed, sits there quietly, waiting for somebody to reach over and flip it. Between March and June of this year, that switch got flipped 4 separate times. And on July 9th, the man who runs federal vehicle safety in this country was asked on live television whether the steering wheel itself could be next. He didn't hedge. He didn't say, we'll study it. He didn't say, that's a long way off. He said, absolutely. My name is Ellen. I spent my working life inside the American automotive world engineering, testing, and reading regulatory filings that almost nobody else reads. This channel exists because the decisions that reshape what you're allowed to own almost never arrive as headlines. They arrive as paperwork. And this one is the biggest piece of paperwork I've seen in years. If you'd rather not miss the next one, the subscribe button is right there under this video. No speech about it. Moving on. Let me lay out what actually happened in order, because the order is the whole story. March 16th, 2026, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, the federal agency that writes the safety rules every car sold in America has to meet, publishes a proposal to amend Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard number 102. That's the standard that says your car has to show you what gear it's in: park, reverse, neutral, drive. The proposal says a vehicle with no manually operated driving controls doesn't need that display. Fair enough, honestly. Who's it displaying to? Same day, standards 103 and 104. Windshield defrosters, windshield wipers, same exception, same reasoning. Then standard 110, the tire information placard, that sticker on your door jamb with your tire pressures on it. The rule says it has to go on the driver's side. But what if there isn't a driver's side? So they propose letting it go on the left side instead. I want you to notice something about that one. That's not a safety rollback. That's a grammar problem. The rule was written in a language that assumed a human being was sitting somewhere specific, and the rule literally could not be obeyed by a machine that has no somewhere specific. That's the first honest thing I'll say tonight, and it won't be the last. A lot of this is genuinely just housekeeping. And then June 26th happened. On June 26th, NHTSA proposed amending Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard number 135, light vehicle brake systems, written in 1995. And here is what that standard has said for 31 years in plain English. Your service brakes must be operated by a foot pedal, not should, not typically are, must. The proposal published on June 26th removes that requirement for vehicles designed to be operated exclusively by an automated driving system with no manual controls at all. The brake pedal, gone as a legal requirement. And on the very same day, the agency withdrew a separate proposal, one written in January of 2025, that would have created a voluntary oversight program for driverless vehicle companies. Reporting requirements, public disclosure. That one got pulled off the table. One door opened, one door closed. Same day, same agency. And then, 13 days later, the administrator sat down for an interview and was asked the obvious follow-up question. If the brake pedal doesn't make sense in a vehicle that will never have a driver, what about the steering wheel? Absolutely, he said. A vehicle designed never to be driven by a person, in his view, has no business being forced to carry controls for a person who is never coming. Now, before anyone in the comments accuses me of going full tinfoil, let's do the honest part first, because the honest part is stronger than you think, and it's the part most channels will skip. Here's the best version of the government's argument. Not the straw man, the real one. A brake pedal in a robotaxi is not a safety feature. It's a hazard. Think about it for a second. You get into a driverless vehicle. You sit in what used to be the driver's seat. There's a pedal down there by your foot. The car is under the control of a computer that is tracking a cyclist you haven't even seen yet, and it has already decided to hold its line. And you panic, and you stomp. Who's right? The machine that saw the cyclist, or the passenger who didn't? Now put a steering wheel in front of that same passenger. Same question, worse consequences. The agency's position is that if a vehicle is genuinely designed so that no human will ever operate it, then bolting human controls into it doesn't add a safety margin, it adds a failure mode. And I've spent enough time around vehicle testing to tell you that's not a talking point. That's an engineering argument, and it's a decent one. There's more, and it's worth saying clearly because a lot of coverage of this story is going to get it wrong. The stopping distance requirements are not being touched. That's the actual safety core of Standard 135. How fast can this vehicle come to a stop from a given speed? That number doesn't change. A driverless vehicle still has to stop just as short as your truck does. The agency isn't relaxing what the brakes have to do, it's changing what the brakes have to be connected to. And these exceptions, every one of them, apply only to vehicles built with no manual controls whatsoever. If a vehicle has a steering wheel and pedals, every existing standard still applies to it. Full stop. Nothing in any of these four proposals reaches into your driveway and touches your vehicle. Let me say that again, because I don't want a single person walking away from this video misinformed. Nobody is proposing to take the steering wheel out of your car. That is not happening. It's not on any docket. Any channel telling you otherwise is selling you something. If you've been with me a while, you already know about the automatic braking mandate, the one your next car won't let you switch off. Hold those two rules next to each other for a second. That one adds a machine's judgment to your vehicle. This one removes the requirement for your judgment to exist at all. Same rulebook, opposite directions, same destination. So if it's true that nothing here touches your truck, and it is true, why am I spending 20 minutes on this? Because ownership and control are not the same thing, and neither are capability and intention. Let me back up and explain something about how this system actually works, because if you don't understand this next part, none of the rest of it will land. Most people assume the federal government tests and approves cars before they're allowed to be sold. That there's some building in Washington where a Ford shows up and a government engineer signs off on it. That is not how it works in the United States. We use what's called self-certification. Here's what that means. NHTSA writes the standards, the manufacturer builds the vehicle, and then the manufacturer certifies its own signature, its own engineers, its own paperwork that the vehicle meets every applicable standard. That's the little sticker on your door jamb. That's what it's telling you. The company is swearing it complied. The government doesn't check first. The government checks after. It buys vehicles off the lot, tests them, investigates complaints, and if it finds a defect or a violation, it uses enforcement power to force a recall. Europe does it the other way around. Over there, it's called type approval. An authority reviews the design and grants permission before anything gets sold. Ours is faster. Theirs is more cautious. That's a real trade-off, and reasonable people have argued about it for 50 years. I'm not here to relitigate it. I'm here to point out one specific consequence of it. If the manufacturer is the one certifying compliance, then the manufacturer is also the one deciding which category its vehicle falls into. And now, thanks to those 4 words from 2022, there is a category that gets to skip the rules. Look at how the exception is actually written. This is the mechanism, and it's the whole ballgame. The rules don't say robotaxis are exempt. They don't say this company or that company is exempt. They don't name anybody at all. They say, a vehicle without manually operated driving controls. That's the test. That's the entire test. Not how safe is it, not how many miles has it driven, not who built it. The question the rulebook asks is a question about the hardware that isn't there. And underneath the hardware question sits a second question, which is the one that keeps me up. How does anyone know a vehicle was designed never to be driven by a person? Design intent isn't a thing you can measure with a scale. It's a thing a company declares in a document, that it signs itself. Now, is anybody abusing that right now? No, not that I've seen, and I'd tell you if I had. The companies building these vehicles are building genuinely purpose-built machines. 2 seats, No wheel, no pedals, no place to put your feet. There's no ambiguity about what those vehicles are. You can't sneak a pickup truck through that door. But that's today. I'm not saying that's the plan. I'm saying that's the capability. Those are two different things. And in my experience, the second one always arrives first. Let me tell you about a piece of hardware that's probably in the vehicle sitting in your driveway right now. In 1994, General Motors started putting something called a sensing and diagnostic module into its cars. Its job was narrow and it was honest. Airbags were new, airbags were controversial, and the engineers needed to know what the car was doing in the milliseconds before the bag went off. Speed, engine RPM, throttle position, later brake status. That's it. That was the entire purpose. Engineering telemetry so that airbags would stop hurting people. Nobody voted on it. There was no law requiring it, no law forbidding it. In the mid-90s, fewer than 1 in 10 vehicles had one. By 2005, roughly 2 out of 3 new vehicles had one. In 2006, the federal government finally wrote a rule about them, Part 563. Read that rule carefully, and here's what it says. If your vehicle has one of these, here's the minimum data it has to record, and here's how that data has to be retrievable. Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't require the box. It regulates a thing the market had already installed everywhere on its own. The rule became applicable to vehicles built on or after September 1st, 2012. Then, in 2012, the agency actually did propose making them mandatory in nearly every light vehicle. And in 2019, it withdrew that proposal, gave up on the mandate. And it changed absolutely nothing, because by then the boxes were already in nearly every car on the road. The mandate had become unnecessary. The market had done the work. Now here's the part nobody saw coming in 1994. That little airbag diagnostic module is now standard evidence in American courtrooms. It has been admitted in case after case, in state after state. Insurers pull it, police pull it, lawyers subpoena it. What started as an engineer's tool for making airbags less dangerous ended up as a witness that testifies against you about how fast you were going, whether you were braking, and whether your belt was buckled. Congress noticed, eventually. The Driver Privacy Act of 2015 says that data belongs to the vehicle's owner, to you. And then it lists the exceptions: a court order, a federal safety investigation, emergency medical treatment, research with your name stripped out, and your own consent, which, let's be adults about this, you have almost certainly already given in a document you didn't read. So, you own it, and it can still be taken. I want to be precise here, because precision is the only thing that makes this channel worth your time. Nobody planned that. There was no conspiracy in 1994 to build a courtroom witness into your dashboard. A group of engineers solved an airbag problem, and 30 years of ordinary institutional gravity did the rest. A capability was created. Everything downstream followed from the capability. That's not a theory. That's the receipts. So let's take that lens and point it at what's happening right now in 2026. What is actually being created? Not a ban, not a mandate, something more durable than either. A parallel body of law is being constructed inside the federal safety rulebook. One track for vehicles with a human driver, one track for vehicles without one. Standard by standard, definition by definition. 102, 103, 104, 110, 135. The agency itself has said the brake pedal proposal is the 5th of these. The 5th. Which is a word that only makes sense if you're counting towards something. And once you have 2 tracks, you get to ask the question that actually matters. Not, will they ban my truck? They won't. That's not the question. The question is, over the next 10 years, which track gets the engineering attention, the capital investment, the regulatory energy, and the political oxygen? Because those things are finite. They always were. Here's what I want you to hold on to. NHTSA cannot take your steering wheel. It has no power to do that, and I've seen nothing suggesting it wants to. The agency regulates what manufacturers are required to build. It does not regulate what you're allowed to keep. The steering wheel, if it ever goes, will not go by federal rule. It will go the way the manual transmission went. Nobody outlawed the stick shift. There was no docket, no comment period, no hearing. It just quietly stopped being offered. First, it was an option. Then it was an option on 2 trim levels. Then it was a special order. Then it was a story you told your kids. The manual transmission wasn't taken. It was discontinued. That's the mechanism. That's how a thing actually leaves your life in America. Not by prohibition, by the option box disappearing. And that decision gets made in a building with no docket number and no public comment period at all. Now let me show you the moment in these documents that made me stop reading and sit back in my chair. In the brake pedal proposal, NHTSA does something unusual. In a footnote, which in my experience is where an agency puts the thing it has been arguing about internally for months, the agency writes that it is taking no position, for now, on how a passenger should be able to tell a driverless vehicle to stop, or on how the vehicle ought to respond if they try. Read that again. They are proposing to remove the requirement for the pedal that stops the car. And in the same document, they are declining to say how you stop the car. They say they'll handle it later, through defect enforcement in the near term and through future performance standards in the long term, which may well be exactly right. Writing a rule about how an automated system should respond to a frightened human being is genuinely hard, and I would rather they take the time and get it right than rush out something stupid. But sequence matters, and the sequence here is remove the control first, define the replacement later. If one of my engineers had brought me that timeline, I'd have sent them back to the desk. That's my read. I could be wrong about it. Reasonable people at that agency clearly disagree with me, and they've been living with the problem longer than I have. There's one more document, and it landed one day before the interview. On July 8th, NHTSA sent a letter to autonomous vehicle developers about what it described as a clear pattern of driverless vehicles interfering with police, firefighters, and paramedics at emergency scenes, vehicles entering active scenes, blocking first responders, failing to recognize a hazard that any 16-year-old with a learner's permit would recognize instantly. That's not a rumor. That's the agency's own words, written to the industry one day before its administrator went on television and said the steering wheel could go. Both of those things are true at the same time. That's what makes this hard. That's what makes it real instead of a story. The technology is good enough that requiring a steering wheel starts to look silly. And it is not yet good enough to reliably get out of the way of a fire truck. Anybody who tells you only one of those sentences is true is not being straight with you. So here's what to do about it. This is the part where I stop talking and you go check my work. There's a docket. It's open right now, and it does not stay open long. Write this down. NHTSA-2026-0728. That's the brake pedal proposal. The one that removes the pedal requirement from vehicles with no manual controls. Go to regulations.gov. Type that docket number into the search box. The proposal is right there. Not a summary of it, not somebody's take on it. The actual document, all of it, free, written by the people who wrote it. The comment period closes July 27th, 2026. Anybody can comment. You don't need a lawyer. You don't need to be an engineer. You don't need permission from anyone. You type your name, and you say what you think, and it goes into the permanent public record of that rulemaking, and the agency has to consider it. Almost nobody does this. That's not a complaint about you, it's just true. The comments on these dockets come overwhelmingly from manufacturers, from trade associations, and from law firms who are paid to be there. The people who own the vehicles that these rules eventually reshape are almost always completely absent from the record. If you want the other three, they're closed now, but they're still readable. And reading them will teach you more about how this actually works than a year of headlines. 2026-0628 is the shift display 1. 0629 is the wipers and the defrosters. 0630 is the tire placard. Read one, just one. They're shorter than you'd think. 2 more things. First, look up Title 49, Code of Federal Regulations, Section 571.3. That is where those 4 words live. Manually operated driving controls. Read the definition yourself. Then go back and read how the exception is written in each of these proposals and watch the same phrase turn up in every single one of them, like a key going into the same lock. Second, and this one costs you nothing. Go out to your vehicle tonight and get the owner's manual out of the glove box. Look in the index for event data recorder. Federal rule requires that statement to be in there if your vehicle has one. Read what your own car has been telling you, in writing, since the day you bought it. Most people have never read it. Almost everyone has one. I'll leave you with the thing I actually believe. You can take it or throw it out. Nobody is coming for your steering wheel. Not this year, not this decade, not by federal rule. If somebody tries to sell you a panic about that, they are selling you a panic. But the word driver is being quietly unbolted from federal safety law, one standard at a time. And that word has been load-bearing in this country for more than a century. It's in your insurance policy. It's in your license. It's in your liability. It's in the assumption so old that we stopped noticing it, that when something goes wrong inside a moving vehicle, there is a person in there who is responsible and who has the means to act. 4 words got added to the rulebook in 2022, and nobody read them. The next 4 words are being written right now, and the docket is open until the 27th. Go read it. Don't take my word for any of this. Take the document's word. If this was worth your time, subscribe. The next one is already in the works, and there is a great deal more paperwork where this came from. My own car is 12 years old, manual climate control, a real key, and a steering wheel that answers to nobody but me. I have no plans to replace it.